Good afternoon. Welcome to IETF 100. This is the GROW working group meeting. Oh, 101. It even says on the slide in front of me. The 101th IETF has commenced. You're in the GROW meeting. If you're not here for GROW, you could stay and enjoy it, or you could go to where you're supposed to be and not be late. Too late. Before we go much further, we need to start thinking about a Jabber scribe and a notes taker. So think if you'd like to do that while I flip through the next two slides. There's a note well. I'm sure you've seen it before. Next time I'll make the font smaller. Somebody told us probably 3 meetings ago at this point that we're supposed to remind you if there's IPR in the draft that you're working on, that you should keep that in mind and then tell the chairs when it goes up working group last call so we can inform the right people, whoever those are, that there's IPR claims. Okay? There's a whole bunch of resources. Again, I'll make that smaller next time so it's more visible. The Jabber room, where we need a Jabber scribe. Who's a Jabber scribe? Ah, John is a Jabber scribe. And that's clearly the wrong agenda. Yes, I'll fix that when we're done. Also, the audio is wrong. Great, I'll fix all those numbers later. I should have searched and replaced a little better. Sadly, SED does not work in PDFs. There are blue sheets. Hopefully everybody has had a blue sheet. Go buy them. If not, make sure to sign it when you go through and make sure we get the right size room and that when legal problems happen, they can tell that you were in here not colluding or something. Jabber scribe is John. Who's the minutes taker? Minutes taker. Who wants to take minutes? Can't really go any further without minutes taker. Wes.
I volunteer Max from RIPE NCC as the minutes taker.
Ah. Excellent. So for the minutes taker, you can take them in your own thing if you like. You can use the crazy web-enabled cloud thing on the. I recommend Notepad. Do that. Then just email Yob or Grow-chairs at the end. As much as you can get down is good. Don't kill yourself. We have an agenda. Oh, I forgot. Before we go to the agenda, we have 3 chairs up here because one decided to leave. Peter's leaving to go do other things, not working group chair stuff. Yes. and Yob is taking over, which is why the beginning says goodbye, Peter.
So Peter, why don't you go stand over here? Peter has eternal youth, but from an appearance point of view, but he's been doing this for 10 years, which is very impressive. So I would like to ask you for an applause for his dedication.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. All right, so Job, I think he was the only volunteer. That's not true, but Job is taking my place, and so I hand off the microphone to you. Good luck. My condolences. No, it's great.
Thank you, Peter. What? So we're going to start this meeting. We're going to start with BMP. Paulo in the room? It's too big to fit in here.
Yes.
Please stand in the pink thingy.
All right. So this is Paolo Lucente, NTT. We wanted to give, together with Serpil and team, an update on these two drafts about BMP, so LOCRIB and ADRIB-out. So what is the current state of BMP is that we can get information about ADRIBing pre and post policies. And this is maybe it was felt a little bit maybe incomplete, or it could be augmented. And so you see the red arrows over there, one here, and one here. So we would like to complement the existing work of ADRIBing with LOCRIB and ADRIB-out pre and post policies, giving the 5 main vantage points to get BGP information. And with this, I'm just repeating what we already presented in Chicago last year. I wanted to do a recap of what are the differences between, we went from 0 version to version 1 of the 2 drafts. And so I wanted just to highlight what are the difference between 0 and 1 in both. The first thing is that, as you see, we added a text saying that we have a new peer type, so that we are saying that the new peer type is LOCRIB. And this is a clarification only. It was already in the 0 draft, and we have added just this little text to, in green here, to say that. We also, added this other clarification here, saying that, we have an F flag so a little bit of clarification about, what would be, LOCRIB, and also what should be in there, and that we have an F flag, meaning filtered, and then essentially saying that, what is the role of the F flag in there. Then essentially we have, a third modification here, in which we have, a TLV. So we were already saying that there is in the peer app an optional TLV in which we could say what is the VRF, so the name of VRF, for example. And essentially what we are saying here is that, in order we can add the same information to the peer down. The motivation for this is just to trying to reduce state. So we have some implementation. I did myself the implementation in PMSCCT of these 2 drafts. And what I'm trying to do is, to try to reduce the amount of correlations that you have to do between, keeping an original state from the peer app all the way in order to, decode, or in order to, present information later in the, in the BGP session. So I forgot to say that also this text that I was mentioning before is a clarification only in the end. And this is, a little text to try to reduce state. Passing to the ADRIB-out, we also had 3 modifications. Also, this one is, just a clarification only. Essentially, here we have, we are just saying that we have, the L flag should be set, always in order to indicate that, information is post policy, and plus the thing that, if we have post policy so we are ADRIB-out post policy, we should, represent how things are actually sent to the peer, right? So it's just a clarification, but it's very important. So what we find on the wire, we should find it in this message. And also here we have another clarification only, in which essentially what we say is that we have a big text over there, just to say that the how to say that, So again, so we have the L flag to say that, we should indicate, it should be set to 0 because, it's to indicate that it's pre-policy, and then, we have all that thing over there. And then the last, here, the last modification to the draft is that we have this new optional element. Again, it's a TLV for the peer app. And this is nothing else that the good old strategy that, with one level of inference, you can, achieve many things in life. And so essentially what we say over here is that, what is a peer group or an update group is something that is vendor specific. And so we want to allow, a TLV, which is a free-form UTF-8, in which you can specify a label for the actual, group, and so for the actual update that we are receiving. And why is that? Is because, there is further a lot of text that I didn't report because it all revolves around this very specific topic, in which essentially what we say is that, there is the temptation of, send over to a BMP station only, the peer group and not the different updates for, that are sent to the single individual, BGP speakers. So essentially, what we want to represent here is just a label for that group of update messages. And this is some feedback that we received in Chicago, to try to limit the chattiness or the verbosity of, of BMP on Adribout, and essentially we took care of that, with this, with this countermeasure. And that's it. So essentially, should I summarize, beyond just the changes to the draft? So what we have here is that we got 2 sets of comments to the drafts. So one is that it's needed work. So it seems there is a kind of feedback that this is something useful that we are doing. And the second is that we received little feedback in sense of what needs to be done, whether there is things that are missing and whatever. So we feel that we addressed all the comments we received so far, but I would like to encourage people if there is any further feedback. Thanks very much.
Any questions from the room for Paolo or the co-authors? Yes, there's time for questions, even for Rudiger-style questions.
Randy Bush. While I like and support these intellectually, we have a serious problem in BMP, both in implementation from the vendors with massive suckage and with weak deployment, probably due in a significant part to the vendors, but weak deployment in the community. I worry that adding more for the weak vendors will not improve things.
Mm-hmm.
And I do like these,
So,
right? It's just,
yes. Yes. First of all, thanks very much for liking this. I mean, first of all, thanks very much for liking this work. So that's the most important. And I actually I share your concern as well. That comes from the deployment, right? Yeah.
Rüdiger Volk, Deutsche Telekom. Just like Randy, I don't have really questions, but I would like to point out gaps that I'm seeing in the overall picture. If you can go to your graph on the, yes, no, no, once further back. Oh,
This is
I think the first graph. Well, okay, not quite sure. What I observe as missing in what I would like to do with this kind of stuff is exactly the information that is dropped between what I can get from the RIP-in BMP and the post policy.
So you mean in between here and this? No?
Yes. Exactly, because it is actually really interesting to know which routes are dropped, and well, okay, it would be even more interesting to know which of my many policy decisions to detect garbage
Yes.
clicked.
Yes. So oh, sorry.
Yeah, and kind of that's not available in this picture. And if I could get that classification somehow out of the BMP, I could work on that with central monitoring. For vendors that actually maintain the RIP-in, which not all do all the time, one could actually just do something and say, well, okay, add an optional exit or drop code to the RIP-in and collect that separately. But the benefits of centralized monitoring goes away. And for those vendors that decide that memory is really scarce, and sometimes they make it actually scarce, that do not maintain the RIP-in, really the information is completely lost.
Yeah.
And kind of adding to the policy languages an optional exit or drop code would seem to be very easy, and having one drop reason recorded and available easily would, I think, help a lot. Because it would be really nice if my ops people have an easy way to report to my customers and peers what specific kind of crap they are sending.
Thanks very much for the comment. So I tell you this. I mean, I have been doing quite some work with pre and post policy myself, really using it in practice, right? And of course, the maximum I could go with the BMP was just doing a validation exercise, which is like I have pre-policy, I have expectations, and I have post-policy, and then I see whether the post-policy matches my expectations or not. So what you are saying is to go the next level, and with already getting in BMP some code or something like, what is dropped by what, or what is passing due to which policy or whatever. To be honest with you, I understand that. I feel this is a little bit out of scope of this work, and especially because I think that we go a little bit in dreamland. Already policies are dreamland for what is standardization. And, yeah, I take your comment. Yeah, I understand. And if there is
So this would perhaps be work for a fourth draft. So we have RIP in, RIP out, RIP local, and then dropped PIB.
sorry.
Because within an existing BMP stream, we could add yet another RIP thing.
Yes, or figure out ways to tweak that classification into the immediate rip-in. Makes things complicated the way I assume the implementations are done.
You see, my concern, and I agree with you, Job, that whatever we should do in this area should be something separate and out of these drafts. My concern is just that, when you go into the policies, area and trying to determine, what is going on, or you try to find a common language across vendors to describe what is going on, like even trying to find a single code for different policy languages.
Kind of very simple. Just give me, like in the usual programming and shell script languages, just give me an optional programmer defined exit code, and I figure out how I do the code assignments and interpret them. That looks fairly easy, and we don't need more than 32 bits. Probably 16 would be fine. Yeah, my
Famous last words.
even my policies are not that sophisticated.
Jeff, so I did have similar conversation with Rudiger about this, and exactly the same responses you do. The thing I do sort of agreed after our discussions is we probably can't standardize everything, and it doesn't even make sense to try. What would be useful potentially is allowing for that extra 32-bit annotation, something that'll fit in most implementations. The cost is understood. This is IETF land. We can take a piece of the code space and carve out a well-known set of exit fields that people can put in their policy languages for very common situations. This is a good thing. And we could also leave plenty of space for people to put in their own exit codes and annotations for their own internal purposes. And they would be internal, and sadly, based on how this stuff would likely be, per router, that means that provisioning has to ensure the consistency. That's a headache. But this is a way to give this type of functionality without having to say, we're going to allow completely abstract UTF-8 strings of everything that we're going to
Yeah,
No,
that's-
let's not do that.
I am totally with you on that. Yeah, fantastic.
All right, thank you, Paulo. If Randy Bush could be so kind to come forward and enlighten us on WKC behavior. Here's a clicker.
So, our good friend Jay Borkenhagen noticed something strange. And a bunch of us got dragged in. When you say set community X, 1997 says you can modify the communities, and all of them provide this set community thing, which we think means remove all communities and replace with this new one or set of new ones. The syntax for different vendors differ, but we're excused if we just call it set. All but one vendor replace all communities. That one vendor replaces all the communities, including some well-known communities, but not others. These are just the well-knowns. And the green ones they delete, and the pink ones they don't. Okay? So you have to know that and take a tweezers and remove those if you want them gone. Okay? So where are we now and what do we do? We try to figure out how to push a button. Okay, so if you don't know this is happening, you may be not advertising the communities that you mean to advertise, and you may be advertising communities that you didn't want to advertise. So, what would we recommend? Should we tell the vendor in particular? Oh, by the way, we've now got 4 or 5 vendors, and there's only one so far who has this unique behavior. So should we tell that vendor that's a bug? Or have there are operators out there who have become knowingly or unknowingly dependent on it? Okay, so that's an item for discussion on this draft that we all have to consider. Okay, currently we didn't feel confident enough that we wanted to say, change the behavior. Don't look at me so astonished, Rudiger. You could be relying on it without knowing it. Did you know this was happening to you?
In German, there's a nice way of saying yes and no in the same word. I was surprised when at the Chicago IETF, at a nice dinner, a vendor engineer was telling me about very surprising behavior. But let me throw one question at you. You are talking about a different treatment of well-known communities and differently colored well-known communities. Actually, the repertoire of well-known communities actually is an interesting thing. At the Irish countryside, IETF, the then IDR chair declared that thinking about how well-known communities were defined in the first BGP RFCs, there cannot be more. And recently our test team came back to me reporting about strange behaviors of well-known communities that I wasn't aware. And
they're just not as well known as they might be.
Yeah, well, okay, kind of,
They're kind of rumored
kind of
communities.
that enlightenment that happened in Ireland kind of has been lost as historical memory to large parts of the community, and they are recycling the same name for stuff that is not the same. And so the question of what are the
What's a well-known community?
Yeah, is LLGR stuff actually a well-known community? It is called a well-known community.
Shall we start another draft? So, we would very much appreciate it if vendors would share their behavior so we can update the document. Okay?
Yeah, for the sharing part, there's actually the interesting question.
Excuse the Californian.
Well, the question is, did we ever find any note about this behavior in the documentation? I don't remember seeing that.
No. We, secondly, would like to say when new well-known communities, whatever the heck we mean by well-known, are defined, the set syntax should treat them as they do the other communities and delete them.
Or in other words, well, okay, you cannot change the behavior of your system with new software versions that know more stuff, because the behavior of the network elements in your network become inconsistent.
No, this would leave it as unsurprising. In other words, when John adds a new well-known community and his set command deletes it, then it will be as today.
Yeah, that's right.
That's all we're suggesting.
Can we not just deprecate the set command?
We could deprecate
Yes.
BGP.
Yeah, well, okay, kind of what we need to do to deal with this in our policy configuration generators. We have to replace the single line that says set by a delete and the set, and we are done. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying.
He's saying that, no, I think what Rudiger was saying is he wants to add a delete all command.
Exactly.
He wants a specific delete all.
Well, okay, I would guess it is available. It may look very weird. Delete with some interesting wildcards and regular expressions and strange symbolic names.
So I jokingly brought up the deprecation, but if I look at NTT's configs, we are using set less and less because of graceful shutdown, and we don't want to stomp on graceful shutdown community. And to me,
The
that is.
timer went off, so could I just, I think, shoot this? Where are we interested in this, or is this just a bug of one vendor? Beyond that, if we're going to start redesigning communities and the semantics we attach to commands of them, I'm not sure this is the place, and this probably is not the internet draft to do it. And now other people are welcome to burn the rest of our time.
Jeff Haas, so I think you need to ask IANA why it's registered as well-known. I think this is one of those cases where they named a registry based off of a piece of the document, and there's not a appropriate backref in the document. So vendors did this partially because IANA had this. IANA had this because of lack of paperwork.
Let's not go down the subject of what's well known. I'm trying to isolate this from a long primrose path. Are there people here that feel that considering this a bug is inappropriate? In other words, that significant people will be hurt if the behavior is changed for that deletion of some well-known communities. That's a binary question.
I think I remember other bugs that had been around for decades, and actually cleaning up and offering a clean policy language for the bug happened very late, and the bug was left in place for those who relied on it. And Jeff may remember what I mean. And he was a video.
John, final comments?
John Scudder. So I actually have read the draft. I get to say that at least once during this meeting. I actually am totally fine with it. It fixes one thing, which is obviously vexing, and I think go ahead with that and do not try to specify complete world peace.
To be clear for those people who don't, the draft suggests leave the bug in place, don't add more to it.
Thank you, Randy.
One suggestion for enhancing the draft would be ask the vendor for the appropriate delete command to be used.
We shall continue this discussion on the mailing list. Different topic, IRR and RPKI. And I'm mostly approaching the topics that come up in this presentation from a provisioning perspective. This is not meant as a BGP sec replacement or to stir up discussions in that regard. What I want to talk about is creating some parity between the features available in the IRR and in the RPKI. Namely, there's some pieces that are lacking in the RPKI. If we improve on that, it will make my life easier in terms of provisioning, and it will enable a certain region of our world where IRR never took off, but RPKI definitely is taking off, namely South America. And operationally speaking, we are struggling in that region of the world because of the lack of the AS set equivalent in RPKI. So let's quickly go through what IRR is, and then we'll build comparisons to what RPKI is, and then we can go from there. The atom of the IRR is the route object. And the route object is basically a tuple of a prefix and an authorized origin. I won't go into how we measure authorized, because there's many different databases with many different rules. But in a nutshell, these two data elements are the most important ones. Then I can query a so-called IRR daemon. I can issue it a command, say, give me the list of prefixes where this origin ASN appears, and then I get back data. That data can either be represented in the raw form, as you see here, or it can be easily converted into a vendor-specific CLI construct. And basically, this is what goes into the provisioning system and is deployed on routers on the eBGP sessions. So to a point, there's a similarity in RPKI, because RPKI, you have in Aroa, you have the prefix and origin. And the nice thing about RPKI is that the data is of higher quality than IRR. So in comparison, you can inspect the ROAS, the repositories. You'll see lists of ASNs and lists of prefixes, and that reminds us of the route object. And you can very easily use simple one-liners to obtain similar data and transpose that into your vendor-specific routing configs. So far, so good. We have the route object in IRR. We have ROA in RPKI. What we also have in IRR is a thing called AS sets. Not to be confused with AS underscore sets. Entirely different thing. And you can see that two very different groups of people worked on this material and did not communicate with each other. But what we see here is an example of my own AS set. We can query the whois server at rr.ntt.net. We ask it for AS15562 : AS Snyders. And we get back this blob of text. And this is a bit grime to parse. Fortunately, you can ask it in a different way. Here we have the easy to remember command, !I, AS15562 : AS Snyders, !1 for recursion. And it gives back a list of all the ASNs that in this particular context mean my downstreams. To further visualize what an AS set looks like, I wrote a small open source tool, IRR3, you can find it on GitHub, and it will visualize how AS sets expand and how the inclusion or recursive inclusion is visualized. So to build filters today, we take an AS set, we expand the AS set into AS numbers, and then for each AS number, we do a reverse key lookup to get the list of prefixes. Then the list of prefixes that is the totality of all those commands is deduplicated, perhaps aggregated in some way, perhaps we prune bogons or other things from it, and that's installed into the routers. Now, a challenge with AS sets today is what if the same AS set name exists in multiple IRR databases? And a great example is AS-Stealth, which exists in both the RIPE database and the RADB database, but those objects with the same name are not managed by the same organization. In fact, they have absolutely nothing to do with each other. Another challenge we see with AS sets is how do you discover which AS set to use, and also how throughout the lifetime of the relation with the peer or customer can the peer or customer inform us that they are renaming for whatever reason. So what happens today, and this is what NTT does, on the service order forms, we ask people to write down the AS set. And then the engineer will use that, email the customer a prefix filter and ask, do you think this is roughly correct? And then the customer says yes or no. And perhaps we need to tweak the order in which we are searching through the IR databases to make it more appropriate in the case of duplicate names. Another common method, perhaps becoming the most common method at this point in time, is to look at peering DB. And then the method that the IR people originally envisioned, namely the import and export lines, is used by virtually nobody. So there is a challenge here. And another challenge is that even if today you don't have a duplicate AS set name, it could appear tomorrow. And that's hard to track. So a lot of route servers will query peering DB per ASN, and then per ASN look at a field called the IRR record, and then they hope something parsable is there. And it's all of it is really a best effort thing. And with peering DB, we have informal guarantees that the AS holder is the one that put that data there. But I say informal, there is no cryptographic verification that the owner actually put that data there. So this is my wish list, and this is the starting point of what I hope will become an extension to RPKI. I want something that will make my discovery life easier. Given a ASN, I should be able to programmatically find the appropriate list of ASNs, of downstreams that ASN wants to announce to me in context of provisioning or perhaps peering. I want guarantees that the owner of the ASN is actually the one that put that data there. With the IR, we have no such guarantees. Anybody can put anything there. Preferably, this should be unilateral declarations. There's been work in the past about adjacency attestations, where both sides can confirm that they have a BGP session with each other. And I think one of the beauties with AS sets is that, and this is sometimes worse is better, but organizations that try to do their best, try to document appropriately in a public registry what they intend to announce, that life should be made easy. And if we make a system that strictly depends on all parties involved acknowledging an attestation, that may lead to operational complexity. And I want per adjacent ASN granularity, because the list of downstream ASNs 15562 may announce to NTT can be different than what I announce to, say, GTT or Telia. So in the discovery mechanism, entity should be able to find a list that is appropriate for entity, and likewise for our competitors. So to that effect, Max and I are trying to work on something called AS cones, because we envision the list of downstream sort of as a cone in that particular direction. This is very raw. It's not yet even ready for simple draft publication. But now I would like to open the floor and hear your thoughts on where to go from here.
Hello, Job. This is George from APNIC.
Hello, George.
I don't play a router configurator either in real life or my dreams. So I have no ability to talk to the semantic intent of what you are doing, what you are trying to say, what the meaning would be on provisioning or routing. I can't speak to that because it's not my competency. But I do think there is a moment in what you are saying here that is interesting. You said provisioning. So that's a clear statement. You have an intent in your mind, and I like that. I think when you talk about RPKI and you talked about modifying, I wouldn't have said that. You are looking to register, and this is my belief. I believe that you are looking to register a defined object type to get the OID assigned, to legitimate use of RPKI, because admission in RPKI signing demands an OID be given and understood to be in the litany of objects expected in registry so they can be constrained and understood. So you're not asking to modify RPKI, you're asking for an OID and a definition of an object. And the last observation is the critical moment I believe the critical moment in the definition of signed objects in a crypto system is who signs and what should be in the certificate. So the intentionality of which AS is plural, have to assert ownership and permission, has to be explicit in what you're saying. And that is the end of what I wanted to say. Thank you for your presentation. I thought that was great.
Thank you for the feedback.
Rüdiger Volk, Deutsche Telekom. Before I get to the really negative side, let me say yes, it's absolutely correct to point out that AS sets are currently very much used, and they are a concept that does not appear within the RPKI context. And it appears obviously in the old RPSL. Yes, for making progress, identifying the gaps in functionality that are with the probably future minded systems, of course, is important so that the gaps can be filled. But for the whole presentation, I would like to point out that there is a big difference between authorization and policy documentation. The whole point of the RPKI is to provide clean authorization. The point of RPSL was policy documentation. And well, okay, 20 years ago this was done, and some not so lucky design decisions happened. Amongst the design decisions, there was that, well, okay, authorization is not really part of it. For those parties, for those databases that wanted to do it, there was an authorization scheme, and only a few of the routing registries actually deployed that. It is, I think, a really bad idea to promote now to see the IRR as an authorization database, which it isn't for the large majority of the servers and the data sources, and try to fix that, while we actually have a fairly well-defined and well-thought-out authorization system. The AS sets, when we are looking at it with the question, well, okay, is that documentation or authorization? The AS sets within RPSL are quite certainly one of the objects that cannot have any authorization, except that you know who is the maintainer, and only the maintainer can fiddle with it. But the references that you put in there are essentially uncontrolled. And when I look at what AS sets my customers give me, I'm seeing crap collect recursively crap. And I wouldn't see how you change that.
It doesn't.
And that needs to be fixed when we go forward and find kind of the next generation construct for it. And yeah, well, okay, I think I said enough for this turn. Yes, yeah. Anyway, at the Irish countryside, you punished me when I gave a presentation. I got the authorization and documentation wrong.
Next in line.
No.
Jeff, as Rudiger said at least one thing that I wanted to say, which is sets are nice. RPKI gives an idea of sort of greater legitimacy than ASSET did in RPSL. So I agree with this point. For your wish list, sets are useful. If such a thing existed in RPKI, this is great. This allows you to say, I, as a party that is publicly telling everybody in a traceable way, which is the property that would happen out of this, say I'm using these things, Rudiger's point being, people can change the stuff behind the scenes and the recursive expansion becomes greater or smaller than you expect. Be careful about what you wish for, because in RPKI, you could say, here is the set of objects at a given OID for a given revision that I'm choosing to include in this set, which may have expired. So you could do these things with a lot more force than you could have done in RPSL, but I don't think you truly mean that. So it is useful, you could do it. And to some extent, I'll point out the same thing that you're looking for in one of your points about what I'm choosing to announce, which is partially what you're trying to use for, is very much the RPSL export statement. And that recursive expansion through different people's customer cones becomes gross very, very fast.
I'm fully aware.
Yeah, it's one of those I would caution.
But even that terrible aspect is still better than nothing. So what I'm arguing is that if we end up with the same thing as AS sets, and we only addressed that we know the owner of the ASN published the list and that they're globally unique, that already would be a huge win for me.
I find that useful.
If we can improve upon that, that'd be great.
I would similarly suggest that the export list that you have out of other RPSL objects does not get included in that object. So keep the IDs separate, you're good. But the last related thing is, even in RPSL, the headache you had of distinct naming, you can actually, as part of your exclamation mark syntax, restrict the sets of databases that are used in your query expansion. This is going to be very similar in RPKI, because the implicit behavior here is that your trust anchor set is what's defining it.
Correct.
Let me ask, if I say, here's a set of ASs or a set which contains ASs and other sets recursively, what authority am I asserting over those objects?
Yeah, great question.
The RPKI is about authority. I think people were saying it in slightly longer sentences than I'm capable of. But if you don't have an authority model, then let's go to the next subject.
In summary, what I face is that in parts of the world, there is no IRR, there is RPKI. So something in that direction.
Both Rudiger and I are AS set addicts before you were using BGP. Okay? We understand your need.
Great.
And sympathize with it. But we're just worried about square peg, round hole.
For the
Trying to understand the shape of the peg and how it fits in the hole. And when I asked the question, I got, that's a good question. So.
Well, since the sets, and by the way, actually there is a very limited way of having authorized AS sets in RPSL, but that's extremely limited. And obviously only works where RPSS is deployed. Since the AS sets actually, as far as we can tell, have no anchoring in an authorization, it doesn't matter in which IRR we advise the Latin American folks to register their AS sets. Kind of when I have a customer out of that region, well, okay, the least common denominator that usually shows up is RADB, and I'm happy to use that thing as that is available. And about everyone outside of Europe at some point in time uses it. And yes, I know there's crap. I know the authorization rules, the free ones. They are kind of really open for any crap you want, if you want to pay a certain amount of dollars. Well, okay, that can be used. Finding actually a good plug to close that functional gap obviously would be a nicer thing, but I'm kind of my closest approximation of what could be done in the RPKI context that is consistent with it is essentially the adjacency assertions, which are not going to be very practically helpful, because that would mean that any small leaf site will have to join in and do their certificate so that you can use it. And we both know there are customers that are not going to do that, and they are far below, and doing a proxy, doing proxy registrations like many operators are doing for customers in the IRR is not really an option in RPKI.
It sounds like maybe we should be discussing this on the mailing list. We do have one last presentation that's super short. So I think, I I'm sorry. I didn't realize it was actually 8:30 or 6:39. So I thought there was more time.
Are you cutting the line or cutting this URL?
I would like to cut the thread off and we can talk about it on the mailing list, I think. If there's something really quick while Alexander comes up and gets
So I'll
ready,
just
go
make
for it.
a really quick comment. Is, at least in the case of ROAs, right, the prefix holder has no authority over the ASN. It's just a signed declaration. So the holder of an AS certificate could
Yeah.
digitally sign a declaration about something else. When we were discussing authority hierarchies or something, it doesn't exist in a ROA either.
Thank you.
So my name is Alexander Azimov. I'm from Creative Labs, and I will try to be very, very fast. So there is common ground. Spoofing, IP spoofing is bad. And for a lot of reasons, URPF is not on fly. So simplifying the problem, if we are speaking about feasible mode of URPF, if according to the traffic engineering purposes, ISP announces prefix only in one direction, enabling URPF at level of other upstream will just drop legitimate traffic. I hope it's clear. And for years, there was no solution for this situation. But recently, it has changed. And it has changed with graceful shutdown community. So now, if this ISP will announce the same prefix to provider B, marking it with graceful shutdown community and no export, and I was also told that no export is not needed here, so graceful shutdown community may be quite enough. Provider B may enable UPRF without any consequences and risks to traffic. So, of course, it's not a general solution. It's still is not working for transit ISPs, but it's working for stable autonomous systems that do have only providers, peers, and so on. What can I say as a summary? We have all parts of the solution already in RFC. We do not need to ship updates to the software if we assume that we already have graceful shutdown community. At the same time, we allowed the usage of this well-known community. That's all. Thank you. Thank questions.
Could you go back one slide, please?
Sure.
Andy Bush, you're asking that customer to go through the effort of changing their configuration to add special communities to send to provider B. If they're going to do that, why the hell don't they just implement BCP 38?
You are still asking your customers to create root objects. Why do you asking them? If you believe that your customer is capable of to do the right things, there is no need in root objects. I said we can believe to our customer. This is all about how to help, assist, guarantee that spoof traffic will not go outside of customer network. Likewise, we are treating root objects and hijacks.
Rüdiger Volk. I think we actually are successful to make customers like this, if they come with their own address space, to do the root objects themselves, but asking them to fiddle special policy into their BGP, I think we would be less successful. So I somewhat agree with Randy. Let me also, since we were talking about well-known communities, classify the graceful shutdown. That is a next generation well-known community, where you cannot tell whether the recipient actually will honor the semantics It is just a hint.
Okay. Still, it's a technical, but
While no export is first generation, and you are supposed to actually honor the semantics.
okay, it's a good point about the well-known communities. What's some interesting things that are happening there, especially in implementations. Still, this is the technical opportunity to fix a significant problem. And if we remember the recent DDoS attacks, including Memcache, okay, part of this attack was corrupted services, and part of it was an opportunity to spoof traffic. If we are able to fix both of them, it's okay. If we are able to fix one part of the problem, it's also okay.
Job Snyder's NTT. I would like to repeat a comment from our earlier conversation. While I think the trick of using graceful shutdown is clever to increase the chances of signaling feasible paths, my main challenge remains finding equipment that can do URPF at a reasonable speed at all. And this strikes me as solving like 2 or 3% of an issue, whereas my 90% of the issue is packet circulation through the fabric and URPF cutting that in half. Or similarly, that I cannot scale access lists large enough for all the potential source addresses. So until that is solved somehow, where my PPS count is no longer chopped in half, I'm not even looking at this.
Okay, one more question? No?
Yeah, Warren Kamari with no hats other than like maybe a dunce one because I'm feeling really stupid. So the graceful shutdown thing says that blah, blah, blah. This policy tags the paths received over the session with a, next one down. Yeah, and sets local pref to a low value. So basically you're just announcing the prefix and saying, please set local pref low on here. So you're just announcing the prefix that way, right?
Yes, sure.
Okay.
And this just gives provider B an alternative route to a customer. So it's just like an informational message. I have this address space. It's available. So please do not.
It's not an informational message. It's here's a route.
If I can help you, Warren. The no export tells provider B not to send it upstream, slow. The graceful shutdown tells provider not to send their traffic that way. That's all.
Yeah, except he actually said that.
That is
Well, he said that he didn't need the no export. I think you do still need no export.
If provider B has full table, it should finally receive the route from provider A. That's the idea.
B will get it from upstream or peer.
Yeah. So
and the fact that they downprefed it will cause them to prefer that.
So no export here is just additional guarantee.
Okay. Local pref doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I think one could even use the more drastic thing that says, don't tell even your internal neighbors. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, if you want to play the trick, that's really the nice way, because there is no use for that route if it has not to be used.
Yeah.
Doug Montgomery, if the no export thing is there, you have no intention or hope that someone upstream of B?
Yes, it is just to be able to enable URPF at the level of directly connected stub network to transit network. This solution can be applied for connection between transits.
In other words, this only applies to stub networks.
Yes, it only applies to 85% of networks. For other 15%, it's not working. But still, it's may save the day.
but it'll also cause source packets to be routed to some upstream of, to be dropped by some upstream of B, right?
The idea that the packets will be filtered at the level of directly connected upstream. So they will not be propagated like with the prefix. So this is.
Right, I understand that's the goal, but you're also assuming that no one would ever perform URPF on something that wasn't a stub.
Okay, this is just, if I got your question right, so this is just an assumption that if somebody was not previously using URPF at the transit, he will not enable URPF at the level of transit. So for transit ISPs, nothing is changing. The connection between transits, nothing is changing. Otherwise, if we should, so basically, as far as I understand, the URPF problem is that BGP as a routing protocol the idea was to use it as a delivering informational messages that some network is available through this interface. It was not working. And in general way, it is not still not working. The other option is to, for example, create some other SAFI and propagate their information about availability. But this way is a deadlock. Maybe it's a mathematical perfect solution, but it will never be shipped anywhere.
So I'm gonna cut in here. We're out of time for this session. What I would suggest is that we further explore the upsides and downsides of this idea via the mailing list. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you for giving me this slot.
And dear GROW attendees, thank you very much for your time. See you in the next IETF. Sure. Let me.
It's going to be real quick because I did.